Cool, awesome. This is gonna be a great panel. I'm very excited. So, emerging area, we got some of most of the leaders in this space. So hopefully we'll get some great learnings. So, and again, we're gonna focus on messaging-based games, instant games, iMessage, whatever else comes up that might be interesting around those different platforms. So I think, why don't we start with some introductions, where you work, what you're up to there, and we can go down the line. Nicole, if you want to kick things off.
Hi, I'm Nicole Opas. I'm a VP of Games at Zynga, and I'm focusing on Wars with Friends on emerging platforms.
Hi, I'm Ja. I'm at Blackstorm Labs. We do Everwing and a bunch of other games, mostly on Facebook platform. We've been doing HTML5 games for like 6 years now, I think, something like that.
My name is Albert. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Big Viking Games in Toronto. We have been investing in HTML5 games for the last 6 years as well.
Hello, I'm Priebe, CEO of Hippo. We're creators of Adventure Capitalist, currently on the Facebook instant game. And my history is actually with HTML games, a long history in it. But recently we're getting back into it, so it's been fun.
Excellent. So I think, we have a decent amount of time here. I'm going to first focus on sort of like the business side of things. And then we'll dive into sort of more of the content and gameplay side of things, as well as development. So I think from the business sort of opportunity side of things, what's most interesting to everyone on the panel? Obviously, you're devoting a significant amount of resources to these platforms, to this format, HTML5. What's most exciting from a business perspective for each of you? And why are you focusing kind of a lot of resources on it? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in. I've always been fascinated with how web games in general are just, as a designer, a graphic designer is actually my trade, but way before video games. It's just how frictionless it is to start the game, engage in the game, connect to the game, and start playing. And the closer we can get to someone just, I hear about something, I click it, I play it, you can get, that just fascinates me. So as a business proposition, it's just, as everybody knows, if you're in mobile gaming space right now, discovery is getting very difficult. And a gaming platform where you can just seamlessly start is incredible. Now, it's going to scare you guys with some of the numbers, because of course that creates that day one retention just plummets because it's a web game. But once people engage, it's they're here for life. They could be here for life.
Albert, what about you? I know you guys have invested a lot.
Sure. Yeah, we've been investing in the black hole known as HTML5 games for the last half dozen years, and it's really, really exciting for us to see that we can now finally sort of kind of monetize. Obviously, Messenger Instant Games is a platform that we have all gotten excited about because it's, arguably one of the only blue oceans that's in the mobile arena right now, from both a discovery standpoint, but also from a game design standpoint. The idea that you can frictionless launch something and instantaneously without a download, being able to share it with your friends without them having to go to the App Store, it's kind of bring that old school canvas game concept back to the modern day mobile device. So it's almost like we're able to recreate that magic that was at the beginning of the canvas era of Facebook. So we think we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what could be done and the innovation that could be had.
Yeah, I mean, key thing for us is just massive amounts of growth. I mean, like a lot of stuff that you guys have highlighted is pretty obvious, but with Messenger and kind of like social stuff, like it's a lot easier to get people who weren't really looking at games to take a peek at a game that they never would have hopped on the App Store to go and search for. We can talk about Facebook numbers, but like actually WeChat just launched their big instant game or whatever it's called, and like I think that thing got to like 100 million downloads or whatever, something like that in 2 weeks or something crazy like that. Like it's like you put something out on a platform that requires no friction to download, it just like, if it's good, it just pops.
Yep. The chat apps are the most social thing on your phone, and to be able to bring games that connect people in ways that make them feel closer to each other, like we do with Words with Friends, where it's the game is part of the conversation. We're really excited to be able to explore these new social networks or new ways of connecting people through their pre-existing social web, and be able to offer them that entertainment experience that goes alongside with their desire to connect with one another.
Excellent. So Nicole, I know Zynga is obviously on instant games, also iMessage. Is that the main focus at this point from the messaging side? Is there other things that you've released, or have you released on any sort of other of these social messaging platforms? Yeah,
I mean, we're looking at any platform where we can serve our audience and reach our audience. So we have had some success on iMessage and Facebook Instant. We are focusing on there because there's great growth. There's new audiences for us to reach out to. The demographics of Facebook Instant are really different than what we see on our native app, particularly with Words with Friends. It's a much younger demographic, and so we have an opportunity to introduce a game like Words with Friends that's been around for 8 years to a new audience who hasn't experienced it before because of a new way to reach them. But as other platforms come online, we have some efforts, R&D efforts, against a slew of different opportunities in the space.
What about the rest of you? John, I know you guys are doing stuff, I believe, in Japan. And just to hear from other folks, like, are you doing iMessage? Are you just focusing on Facebook? Are there other platforms that are interesting to you, even if you're not doing something yet? We talked about WeChat.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like, it's, Albert knows a little bit about, my background is definitely doing social growth stuff. So, like, we were there for, Zynga long, but basically there for, like, the first kind of big Facebook app storm. And the key things are, like, to highlight is just more with the type of distribution, the app platform itself has to really kind of support the features that allow people to kind of discover the games. And iMessage is interesting, but it's pretty limited in your ability to kind of go explore social graph stuff. So we haven't really thought too much about iMessage on our side. Facebook has definitely been kind of like the big opportunity, but like it's pretty clear that within this year, like HTML5 and Messenger platforms, it's going to launch on everything globally. Absolutely. So I'm pretty sure everybody on this panel is like looking at all the same platforms.
Other folks? Albert, what are you guys? Are you just doing Facebook right now, or other things unannounced?
We're definitely focused on Facebook. We think, obviously there's 1 billion+ people on Messenger. And not only that, not only is it a massive audience, but it also gives you enormous creative opportunities that were never possible before. So we never actually had social games on mobile, in my opinion. Like, there was never a very easy way for you to play games with your friends in a frictionless way. With Messenger, obviously, you can create clans from just, having a group chat. You could have something where you could share with your friends relatively quickly, and they don't have to jump through the same amount of hoops. You're able to really take advantage of the idea of a social game in the mobile platform without, just really cumbersome stuff that you have to otherwise go through. But I do think that there's a lot we can learn from Asia. I've spent probably at least a few weeks a year in Asia, specifically China, watching the emergence and the maturity of HTML5 games in China, and specifically in WeChat. And it's incredible how sophisticated those games are and how much money they've been making over the last year or two. So once again, we're seeing that in China, they have taken a leadership position in figuring out novel technologies and new ways of monetization and discovery.
Lance, how are you guys? Are you just doing Facebook at this point, or?
We're doing Facebook Instant Games, but interestingly with the HTML5 and the small footprint in these in-app games, or whatever we want to define them in the future. But our lead product, Venture Capitalist, one of our biggest innovations in the last year and a half was grabbing onto the advert game market. And we're finding that both the development of advert games, or the style of how to build that small, quick play, is similar to what we're finding on the instant game market as well. And as a company, strategically, it's really helped us build out teams to either the product has to make money or it has to promote a product. One of the two. It's working well for us as a business.
And so you mentioned talking about basically this idea of we have playable ads, and then thinking about HTML5 lightweight games. There's some maybe convergence of that, like actually being able to play this game of yours in some other app. I mean, how do you looking at that?
We're really looking at that because we see it already. We're focused primarily on the idle genre. So people are, if you're not familiar with how idle games work, you just get them going, you set them up, and they start playing by themselves. What's fascinating about the idle genre is that we generate a lot of our income through ad revenue. So opt-in style ads. But even better, in the last year and a half or so, once these ad games have started appearing, or in-game games, the idle genre has really played well to that, because you play the idle game, you get it set up, and then you start playing other games that could reward your main game, or you just go off and enjoy a new product. The genre of idle games, of course, is fascinating because we're okay that you leave our game. It works because you're not playing it.
Cool. So next, I mean, I know not everyone's gonna be able to share anything around this question, but Lance, you mentioned maybe being able to share some of the sort of retention and monetization, like even directionally. Like, how are you seeing it, especially since you have a game that's on native and now on Messenger? You mentioned you maybe be able to look at the data.
Oh, I brought a little bit of it. It's amazing. So even in our venture capitalist game, the standalone, let's call it the pure mobile version or the Apple version, the app. We need a new language for all this types of products coming. That one's always been sensational. That game has day ones of over near 60%, with day 30s high 40%, 30%, and then we're tracking our 1 year at about 10%. So it's insane, that product. But when we move to instant games, now you remove the barrier of how much money we have to spend to get that first install, because if you guys are in mobile right now, it's all, you spend money. But in the instant game, what's been amazing is, like, in the last 30 days, we're getting over like 3.7 million players like installing the application, but we're also getting retentions less than the mobile, but in the 30% mark for the day ones, and day 30s are tracking around the 10% and stuff. But we've barely touched the social features as well. If you've played our Adventure Capitalist in the instant game market, it's actually our adver game version. Now, as we start adding the social features, we're interested to see what happens.
Any other general comments around like retention or anything that people have seen, even directionally? Like, is things generally better, similar? I think for Lance, it's sort of a different product, so it's not exactly comparable.
I mean, I think that one thing that I'd like to highlight is that, for the numbers of for acquisition on the instant game side, like, we pretty much spent no money, right? So if you want to compare, like, even if you're saying, let's say if your retention's half of what you're doing on the native side, like, you're spending like
zero.
Yeah, like when you multiply by 0, that doesn't matter. Like, it's and so I mean, for us, it's just like overhead cost of, for instance, how you want to go and host for it, and so just kind of like it's all the it's as Albert says, with from a blue ocean side, like, all this will change in a year or something like that as basically user acquisition starts to come into the play. But like, at least for this current phase of things, like, it doesn't really kind of figure into how you go and value the specific marketplace right now. But what we've seen for numbers are they're fairly comparable to native. Once you basically factor in that you want to figure out what your starting point is. Your starting point isn't like from the first click in, because it's very different from how your native game looks like. But then if you figure out similar starting points for native download, and then you can look at the retention rates, they seem it's a slight discount, but it's not a big change actually.
Yeah, from our studies, we've seen that it's typically like roughly half of what you would get from native. And I think a lot of it has to do with how well you are able to optimize your bot notification and how clever you are about re-engaging your users. And I think that's the other thing, that's from a creative standpoint, that you got like this really cool in-between game and sort of this bot that can do in-game stuff without going into the game. And that, I think, has a lot of potential for creative exploration. Just, being able to create habits that doesn't necessarily require you to launch the game and wait for it to load, and where you can interact with some form of a bot that could speak to you, or that you could have multiple options for doing things that would otherwise maybe more too cumbersome for you to launch a game to interact with. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities for interesting game design on this platform that was just never possible before.
I want to quickly inject. If you're not familiar with how Facebook Instant Games works, the bot and the game are actually two separate services, I guess they call them. It drives me crazy because it's different dashboards completely. But it's more than notifications, what we're finding, and I think everybody here agrees. Notifications on your Apple, and it's just ding, come back, you earn some money. These bots or messengers, it's a full engaged conversation that we haven't got enough data yet, but I'm sure some of you guys have started getting it. There are players engaging more with the bot than they are at the game at some times.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Albert said too, is that when you think about this is, Zynga was firing on all cylinders when we had our games on Facebook native. We were really taking advantage of the social graph. Some people would say we took too much advantage of it and started spamming players' news feeds. But what we have always tried to do is use that social graph to let players have a better, more enjoyable experience. And hunting the news feed for the thing that you needed to complete your task was quite fun for those who were playing, maybe not as fun for those who were just watching it go by. And on mobile, we have struggled with how do we truly connect people. I think we've all tried things like accessing the address book, or trying to get players to go onto Facebook or connect through Facebook. And there's higher retention with players on Facebook than our non-Facebook connected players. So what this platform gives us is just that opportunity to really be back in the social space, and taking a game that is truly social, like Words with Friends, where you rely on another human being to play your game. That's both an opportunity and a limitation for us. Right now, we don't have a single player experience. You have to have somebody play you back. And you would think a game like Words with Friends, why would you put in a single player mode? Well, that would really give players an opportunity to have a nice beginning and end to a session, where the metrics that we're looking at not is how many people enter the game, because we have a lot of people entering the game, but the metric that matters to us is how many games they're starting and what the playback is. And when we look at that metric, comparing native and instant, the instant messenger platform, it is very comparable. Once they get that social experience, and once they're captivated into the game with somebody else, they retain as they do with our other versions of the game on other platforms.
Cool. So we touched on sort of Facebook Canvas original, back in the day, if you will, a few years ago. So, obviously this is an emerging platform. There's huge opportunity for growth. How are we going to avoid those kind of pitfalls that we ran into with the original Facebook Canvas, and that it kind of got crowded and then users sort of abandoned the platform? How do you see that evolving, and how do you see Facebook sort of managing that going forward? Do you think this is going to be an issue again as it gets more competitive, or do you think it'd be very proactive to prevent that?
I want to mention one thing about the platform. It's still incredibly early. We are talking about a platform that doesn't even have an ad platform for you to drive traffic to. So right now, you can't even buy ads to drive and deep link into your Messenger game, as an example. We don't have in-app purchase, which is something that we're expecting sometime later this year, which is fantastic. And things are still very much in flux. The tool chain for developing these games are super immature. And so I think we're still in very much the first inning of things, and discovery is is just suboptimal to be gentle about it. It's a list of games, and so I think there's still a lot.
It's not even alphabetical, nothing.
Yeah, I think to that question, we're all going to learn from each other. As Lance was saying, like looking at how we use that bot and making that bot smarter, more intuitive to your gameplay instead of just being that beck and call to bring you back into the game. I think that players are much more mature. They can easily identify between a message that tells them that they need to come back because there's something special, or a friend needs them, or this is the right time to play. When you look at the message for HQ is live right now. Get on your phone. So we're going to learn from each other as we try to explore how to best use that bot, how to best use the social graph to leverage people playing with people they know, people that they don't know. I think that Facebook will keep us all in check in some way because it really wasn't, it was Facebook changing their algorithms rather than people leaving the Canvas platform first. And then people moved on to mobile, where the discovery of mobile games was much less than it was.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would remind is like, it's actually been 10 years since Canvas. Right? And if you think about it, 10 years ago, Canvas, what that meant was iPhone just came out for the first time. And Facebook was 1/10 of the size of what it is today. And so, like, in some regards, hopefully, like, they're, as an organization, far more mature about what they're thinking about, and how they're kind of addressing it. The teams are much more solid. They're much larger. Like, when we first started doing Canvas, they didn't even, the first idea for Zuckerberg as an app was to manage a reading list, right? It wasn't even games. I had no idea. Like, it's just like, it was a pre-game era. And so kind of the sophistication of kind of the business of the guys that are sitting here that have been doing it, as well as kind of the teams at the different messaging companies, like, they know how platforms are done now, maybe more so than ever. And so, like, they're thinking more about, less about super open platforms and more about something that's just kind of like more tailored towards specific metrics, which is like great user engagement, good monetization for the game companies, and without pissing off too many people. So I definitely think it's unlikely that it'll go the same path that Canvas did. But the other reminder is, which is, I've built several businesses off of other platforms, MySpace, Facebook, and whatever, is that you have to know that things are going to be an unstable thing, right? So, in the video space right now, like, Facebook's changing their feed, and anybody in the media industry, like, their business is about to change real drastically this year, and games on Facebook is all, subject to the same type of volatility.
And again, the original Canvas platform was open, so right from the start, it was kind of like there's always be bad actors. So I think hopefully that will not be the case. How do you see like distribution emerging? Any hypotheses around how that might look, in the future? I know obviously it's very early right now. We just have a list. Any sort of thoughts around what that might look like on instant games?
I think somewhat recently, Facebook has come out and confirmed that we will be able to cross-promote. I think that was kind of up in the air for some time. So that's going to be, I think, obviously an important characteristic of the platform. Ja and I have been involved in the Canvas platform like a decade ago now, and we've seen the rise and fall of that platform. And one of the key things that we notice is, the ability to cross-promote is super key. Especially in the social environment. So I think that's definitely something to keep track of.
Yeah, and for us, I think one of the things we're looking to is also just understanding how they look at cross-promotion, not necessarily just between chat, but also to native. I would just highlight two distribution things that chatbot for us, what I've seen is actually super, super duper interesting. Like, it's like, it's surprising what people will chat with. I guess that's one way to look at it. So you can like come up with like some really interesting stuff, and like we're just kind of scratching the surface of just doing kind of basic chat interfaces. And the second piece is, yes, there isn't an ad platform right now to do user acquisition. And so once you start bringing money into the game, things start to rapidly change from there.
So here's a question that you can comment on or not. So, you know, obviously we have had issues in the past with, like, especially Apple with this idea of like a store within a store. How do you think? I mean, again, if everyone starts navigating to instant games away from native apps, you know, and then I believe, you know, Apple was getting, the stores will get a cut of this in-app purchase. Maybe, I don't know. That'd be my hypothesis. How do you see this evolving? Is this gonna be problematic if suddenly there's a mass migration into, you know, instant games and the stores no longer control sort of like distribution? I mean, do we see this as potentially being an issue? Any sort of comments around this? This is something that I think potentially could be an issue because Apple, you know, some of the stores like to maintain control of kind of what's happening in the ecosystem.
I see it as an issue. This is one of those, we're still, of course, always reminding my team that we're in a beta, officially by Facebook. And as you commented, it's always humorous that we get the new SDK documentation, then we have to phone them and ask them what the command was that they didn't put in the documentation. We are, at the end of the day, still subject to what's Google and Apple's decision with their relationship with Facebook. Current indication sounds like we're going to be able to do some very interesting things with in-app purchase and even access to everything Apple offers. I haven't heard on the Google side yet, like subscription, etc. But that's still subject to somebody actually doing it, so we're all waiting.
Any other?
Yeah, and the latest information that we have is that it's going to be a not straight 30% cut, but it's going to be probably something along the lines of Apple takes their 30% and Facebook takes a certain percentage. That said, while that sounds terrible because you're obviously getting less of the overall pie, the fact that you're getting customer acquisition for free and you're getting a lot of organic, it offsets the pain of not capturing, you know, 70% of the overall revenues.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, we see that obviously in Asia with the messaging platforms there. You know, people are taking 30% of 30%, and still everyone makes games for Kakao and WeChat since the distribution is massive. Cool. So, like, shift into sort of more of the content development, user experience stuff. So, I mean, we've touched on some of these things around this idea of frictionless, getting into the game experience frictionlessly. What else is exciting about these platforms from more of a content and development perspective? I think we've talked about, obviously, the social part, but anything in more detail that folks are really excited about in terms of actual content development, game mechanics, things like this?
I'll just jump in real quick. I'm really excited about just some, we've shared a little bit, the idea of the new ways we can connect players. There are some features we're still not doing as developers that Facebook has offered as tools. One of them is in Messenger, you can create almost a public group. Like you just start it and people join a group and you can start chatting and everyone's in the group. What's interesting is that group is actually visible to us as developers to build games with. So we haven't even started to dive down the road of what happens if there's a chat channel and in that channel is running a game that's an instance of that channel, and you can join it that way versus starting a game and inviting your friends. There's opportunities that we still haven't explored quite yet, and that's just so uncharted and it's exciting.
Yeah, we, on Words with Friends, we just launched video chat, so you can play a Words with Friends game while you're video chatting. And that's, that announcement's coming from Facebook soon, but that's really interesting to be able to replicate the experience of playing a board game around your kitchen table through video chat, which is one of the most used applications of Messenger. So that'll be really interesting to see if we can expand gameplay in real time and really take advantage of people seeing each other eye to eye. Imagine a poker game where you would be able to play against people in a group chat setting and feel like you're playing at a, what would be a real virtual, I don't know where the line would be between a virtual and a real poker table. We also just introduced instant play. On native Words with Friends, we see about half the people play Words with Friends with someone they know, and the other half through our discovery channel, which may be people that play the game similarly to you or a friend. And now we've taken advantage of applying Facebook's new threading that allows us to connect people who want to play together right now. For us, we think that might solve some of the retention problems early on by connecting two people who have the intent of playing immediately instead of having to wait for a real life friend to respond to your game request.
I mean, for us, like the change in game design is, I mean, it's the same. We think about it in context, and like the context is, I mean, one of the things that like we mentioned is like when you actually start a chat channel, you don't actually know who's in the chat channel, which is one of the fun things that you get to kind of design around. And you can actually keep on creating more and more chat channels, even with the same person, which you don't know whether they're in the same room or not, unless they actually start the game associated to it. But the kind of one of the key design challenges, and which is actually a fun thing for us, which we're like experimenting with, is how you view the game in a chat channel versus how another person views it in a chat channel doesn't have to be the same view. And so you can actually create lots of interesting game design techniques in instances where it's like you're playing the same game technically versus each other. It's multiplayer, but it's totally different state versus each other. So that's kind of created lots of really kind of fun design scenarios. It gets complicated when you think about people abusing the system, but like we've actually put a lot of that design into kind of our more multiplayer designs.
The thing to keep in mind about instant games is that it has to be instant. And so this is not something you typically have to deal with when you're dealing with native applications. But the fact that you're in a messenger platform means that your players may be actually in the middle of a number of different chats. And so the idea that a game may take 5 or 10 seconds to load is just going to be unacceptable. So the time to first interaction is going to be extremely key if you want somebody to feel comfortable launching the game over and over again as they context switch from your game back to chat, back to your game. And that's just something you really want to really focus on, is making sure that first time loading experience is really fast.
So that's actually an interesting point. So, obviously on the native side, we've seen a lot of things. The content has become more robust and complex, like deeper, bigger downloads, better graphics. Will instant games really be limited to things that are more sort of mass market and casual, or do you see it following the same progression in terms of the types of experiences as like data speeds get faster and devices get better, things like this? Can we support, mid-core game experiences that are generally more robust, or is this going to be more of like a mass market sort of casual platform from what you guys think?
Well, you're not limited by the package or build size like a native is. Once you get past that first initial installation and the game starts playing, with Facebook Instant Games, we can start streaming additional data as you go. So it is technically unlimited. We don't know at what point does the messenger stop caching, and unless you guys have figured that out yet, but.
But in terms of like Albert's comment around the sort of game session and gameplay, is that just like users getting used to that and then extending that out further? I mean, do you think you can have those longer experiences, or because it is a messaging experience that you're going to be sort of constrained by that session time?
I think there's a lot of different factors with it, but I think the broader factors is when user acquisition comes into play. That's the same thing that happened on native, right? Because casual games can only have a certain ARPDAU, and so they can only afford to pay certain types of user acquisition costs, and that slowly basically got to a point where basically really high monetizing games were pricing out casual games. It's not like people don't want to play casual games on their iPhone today. It's just that they can't be competitive on the user acquisition side. And so for this, to me, is like more of an economic equilibrium side piece of it, which is, where does the Facebook user acquisition equilibrium look like? And so like based off of that, that's pretty much where the games will probably land. And so I assume that they won't be as hardcore as native, but they'll definitely move towards midcore for sure. Concepts of like doing dynamic streaming and loading and stuff like that's really important for what we do today, and like I definitely feel like it'll move towards more midcore, but it probably won't make it to hardcore.
what about like from a technology and development perspective? Like, how are things sort of different when you're making these type of games? I mean, some of it is obviously bringing content from native. How is that process different in terms of releasing updated builds, like pushing things live, just like the tools and things like this? Is there a lot of like things out there that are you building stuff yourself to support like this development process and the games once they're live, or is it pretty straightforward?
I mean, to do games that are kind of competitive to native games, like it's almost all like proprietary stuff. Like all the stuff that's available out there to be able to perform, to basically load instantly, to basically have a really small download size, and be able to have an entire workflow to be able to kind of take assets and whatever and load them into it. Like that's all. There's not a lot of stuff out there for it. But the other side of it, which is like super awesome, is you can push releases pretty fast, which is like when we moved from like Canvas stuff over to native apps. Like that was like the thing I hated the most, right? Like you want to submit a release to Apple like a month later, and then like you can push like every week, like you can push every day. Like it's freaking awesome. Like it's totally worth it.
Other thoughts, Albert? Do you guys build all your own tools? You've always been working on this for a long time. I mean,
yeah, it really helps if you are investing in your own tool chain. Most of the open source stuff out there are good, but not great. And again, it comes back to the experience that your players are expecting from your games will be that it loads instantly because they're not going to want to wait a long time, and they're expecting games that look and feel native. The good news is that the hardware and the browsers are getting faster and better, and so you're seeing a lot higher performance from devices today. This is why stuff that we were doing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago were a complete disaster because the browser just wasn't fast enough. And you got LTE that has near ubiquity now. The other thing that's kind of interesting is if you think about it, there is really no other thing that drives 5G adoption other than instant games or instant applications. The human mind's ability to wait for something is pretty fixed and is not like lowering with each generation. And so for 5G technology, I don't need to have video conferencing with my mom in 8K video, but I do want higher quality, cooler stuff that will launch in a second or two. So what's really exciting for me is the fact that this technology scales with bandwidth. And the other thing that's really awesome is WebAssembly, which is a technology that is theoretically going to allow for faster and better JavaScript performance that just came out in the latest version of iOS and Safari. So this is, in theory, something that can allow you to get 10x the performance. The reality is that's not 10x, but it shows a lot of promise.
Cool. What do you think the trend will be? Obviously, we're still very early, but if these platforms take off, do you see a lot? I mean, I hear a lot of folks are working on instant games at this point. You guys had obviously like first mover advantage for various reasons. Do you see a lot of shift from native to these HTML5 different platforms? How do you guys see that trend evolving for developers who have been focused on like native apps? Do you see a pretty significant shift, or otherwise?
I don't think the shift is going to necessarily be there until the platform monetizes and is stable from a monetization standpoint. I think companies who either have depth of a bench in HTML5 and web games, or have more employees, were able to dabble in both. And it's so new that dabbling is, you got to kind of go at it as a R&D perspective rather than a business venture. So while the distribution is fantastic, if you can't do too much with those players, it's sort of a fun thing to be in right now. And we're experimenting, but by size, we are much more on focused on our mobile business. But we definitely want to be in emerging platforms, whether it's Messenger, chat, AR. We're constantly looking at where we can reach players in new places and the platforms that they're on. So I don't see this shift happening very fast. I think there was a lot of excitement around iMessage as an example, and that's sort of, I think that is now, the embers are a little out on iMessage. But Apple could come back and surprise us with something that lets the player explore and discover in a better way than they've done so far. I think it's way too early to tell that we'll see a shift, but as Facebook opens up its beta or opens up the platform to more developers, there definitely will be a variety of games. Something is going to pop on there. Something is going to captivate that player's excitement. And if they figure out, hopefully one of us is doing that, if we particularly figure out a way to make it a meaningful business, I think that's when the fire will really grow, and we'll see a lot more of the developers take this area more seriously.
I always just joking here, but I always thought, the game industry, when we come up with a new platform, it's when you go to GDC or something, and that's all the talks are, and the floor is 50%, and then we know that platform made it, or it's VR, I guess.
Or it's too late.
Actually, I was like, China's about to go nuts on it. That's for sure. Like they're in the last year, there's already proven HTML5 games that are making serious money. And like with WeChat starting to really focus on, they're not even focused on it, they just gave it a try. And like it's hard to emphasize how successful that game was. Like I was in a Chinese restaurant in Tokyo. I was like playing the game. I just asked the staff there, "Do you know this game?" Like everybody there knew the game. And so from a China's perspective, every team, part of it's actually also basically kind of like whether there's talent there for it, and China's just got a huge background for web games, and so they can pivot into that pretty darn fast. Every Japanese game studio is definitely looking at it right now, but they don't have the talent, so they're going to research it, and they're going to dabble in it, but like they're not going to be able to put their best foot forward, but China definitely will be. So that's what we're seeing.
Cool. Yeah, I know there's games that are already making like millions of dollars. Yeah. I won't say a day, but a week or something. And then I just read that like Ketchup is partnering with Tencent to bring a lot of their games over on the platform. So I think that'll be interesting. Cool. So we'll take some questions here in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about bots, because this is kind of interesting. You guys talked about it a little bit earlier. I mean, how are you leveraging? We'd love to hear any specific examples of how folks are leveraging these in conjunction with their game experience. Like, how are you leveraging them? Like, what's that user experience look like? Is there other games on the platform that you see doing cool stuff? Any kind of just specific examples you can give of like really cool things that people are doing around that on the platform?
I forgot the name of the game, but it's a basketball game. Like, yeah. Yeah, and like they basically have the whole like questing thing going on, and so like it's like you kind of maintain a conversation where you feel like you've dived in. It's like playing an RPG, but like the RPG characters are actually chatting with you, right? Like it's pretty cool. Yeah, and so like it's so from that perspective, I think it just like scratches the surface, right? Because before instant games, like chatbots themselves have already proven like at least some strength. For instance, like I'm doing e-commerce, doing basic customer support, and like kind of like interactive retention. But obviously, being in Japan, we have a lot of the virtual idol, virtual girlfriend type of stuff, and like that stuff in itself will definitely work. But like what we've seen with some of our experimentation, just putting some basic, I wouldn't even say really AI on it, being able to, just personality and conversations. Like it is, people will just, like I said, it's amazing what they'll chat with. It's like, and we just scratched the surface. So I think it's a huge thing, because people want to chat with somebody at any given time, and there's just a ton of people out there. And one of the things that we haven't talked about too much but we focus really kind of on the U.S. market for Facebook, where Facebook is 1 billion users globally, and use cases from country to country, especially on chat, is like super different. And so that's been very interesting for us to see too.
Any other cool things people have seen or that are exciting around bots related to your games?
We're still experimenting with it. I made a bot adventure game maybe 2.5 years ago or something when they released the bots. What mesmerizes me as the tools keep getting better is you watch this stream of people in dialogue, because interestingly with Facebook, if you just turn on your phone and log in as the page, you can see everybody talking. But they keep pressing like and hearts and everything on every message sent by the game. And that one I'm just always wanting to just jump in. It usually scares people because you can actually just jump in and start talking.
You gotta pretend to be like the robot.
Yeah, I know, you gotta pretend, but they usually go, whoa, who is this?
Is anyone having success getting players to play in groups, and are you seeing interesting group behaviors? Maybe other than Everwing. I think Everwing does it awesome. I'd love to hear other stories. Or if not, then how's Everwing dealing with groups?
I mean, all of our growth comes from group play. Absolutely. The bigger the groups, the better.
But is anyone else seeing that besides Everwing? Or I don't think people play Words with Friends in groups or Adventure Capitalists. Or have you seen any other games that use groups well? Or just tell us the secrets to what makes groups so awesome in Everwing.
We have some things in design and a pre-launch stage that takes advantage of groups as well. We're super bullish on groups. It's one of those methods where you can use it to gain virality and discovery. So I think it's one of the key things that's going to be in any future instant game.
Thanks. Do you see any potential in other platforms except of Facebook Messenger? You mentioned iMessage, but what do you think of other local messengers in other countries? iMessage is kind of down. Do you plan to expand?
So any other messenger platforms that you see coming?
Well, I'm just bullish about it. I think it should be on every app where you live. So I look forward
What's
to it.
next
I look
for
forward to a day that if they're in the audience, hey, Snapchat, please put instant games in your Snapchat. But even Discord was speaking here earlier and stuff like that. I could imagine any of these social gathering, these networks, these hubs, could launch any variety of these styles of games. The way we've built them all and the way the platform, the actual technology works, it shouldn't be limited to just Facebook Instant, to the Messenger, but it could happen anywhere. So like we're finding great success in just advert games, which are just instant games being launched inside another game. I'm curious what's going to happen one day if Apple ever releases. My career started making little games for miniclip.com. I look forward to when are we going to get those little apps that open up and boom, there's a game of the day, game of the day, game of the day. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean the platform is WeChat that we keep talking about. I think so. That one's already. I think the only Facebook is the most interesting one for several reasons. One is they are not a fully closed platform, and they're actually beating the drum pretty hard to get as many developers to look at the platform as possible, whereas other platforms might not be as open. And so like almost all platforms are going to be looking at doing instant games, but WeChat is an obvious example of one.
Yeah, and I think, for WeChat, there are people, like again, these are just games that can exist anywhere, right? So there are people making HTML5 games on WeChat before it was sort of like supported. And then when these games started making like millions of dollars, they're like, oh wait, we want some percentage of that. So I think we've seen a lot with native, obviously, like Kakao and Line, and even in the West, you had like Viber and Tango who tried it and abandoned it. So, it can be supported and unsupported too, just based on how these games work. So I think we can assume that especially the Asian platforms will all be releasing stuff very soon to support the games. The sort of Western ones, I'm not sure. A lot of them haven't seemed very bullish on games or have tried stuff that didn't work.
Okay, thanks.
You're also seeing Lion and Kakao dipping their toes into this as well. And another North American platform is Kick, which actually launched their bot game platform even before Facebook did. So there are other platforms, but they're not nearly as far along.
On Facebook Instant Games, how's the ad monetization working so far? Is the ad rates similar to other platforms, or when you compare native ads to instant game ads, how are they comparing so far?
I mean, ad monetization is great. It's without understating it, it'll support a game development studio. So if you're an indie studio that's looking to do instant games, if you have any form of distribution, you'll be able to monetize it quite well.
Are the eCPM rates or the fill rates similar to other platforms?
I mean, I haven't actually competitively looked at other platforms too much, but like at least my really old data from before, it's actually, I mean, it's performing very well. Well, you know, like a Facebook platform, like fill rate, like any other ad platform, fill rates or whatever depend on the day to day. But if you look over, like it's the easiest thing to think about is it's definitely a viable platform from a monetization standpoint for sure. And especially since you're not paying for user acquisition.
All right, well, thank you guys so much. That was awesome. And I think it's time for lunch. But thank you guys very much. Give them a round of applause.